It is Shirley with Spirit of Matter. And this is a moon day and a Mars hour. So, a bit of a divisive topic for today with Mars in Libra in the 8th house, Moon in Scorpio. So, Scorpio ruled moon. And the moon is trining, separating from a trine with Saturn that's right on the ascendant, Saturn retrograde in Pisces. And the midheaven is also ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter is in the 3rd house in Taurus. Square in Venus, that is the ruler of Mars. The Sun today is in the 7th house, 25 degrees right on my descendant. And opposing Neptune, that is not too far from my ascendant. My personal pastime for the Scorpio moon is doing fun things with Synastry, and I thought to bring you Synastry and kind of like show you how I analyze the Synastry, but I realized that if I would just make random charts, it's not interesting. We are still with Venus in Leo and we want to have some fun. And if I bring you one of these romance, it's too yellow and cliche. And so something caught my eye, which is a relationship between crime reporter, as deceased Peter R. de Vries. And I have more serious videos about de Vries. I have about his chart, and I pretty much raise awareness wherever I can to what the police did before his death and how quickly they were to resolve his death, but you know, that they could have easily avoided. But the thing is, this one is a more light-hearted kind of looking back. And in his life, he had a friendship. So first of all, he had a show called Misdaadgeslager, which means resolving crimes that nobody tended to. Yeah, he did that for many years. One of the people that into which case he looked at was a criminal named Cor van Hout, and he kidnapped there's somebody who founded Heineken or owned Heineken together with another person. Eventually, they managed to find and release, I think. I don't remember, but eventually Peter was the one that brought this case into justice, and Cor van Hout ended up in jail. From that point, something very interesting happens. Is during the court, they had kind of an exchange looked, and well, basically de Vries was not only a reporter, but he was also a writer, and he was interested both in writing, writing about crime and so on and so forth, as well as he was a person of entertainment, but also there was a very genuine interest in the person. Okay, that is that criminal, and they formed a relationship that had very interesting episodes, like them both running out in an airplane, trying to find a place to land and not finding it, and all kinds of things and camaraderie that you would not expect between someone who was described as a brutal criminal and the reporter that got him in jail. So this is a very interesting, funny, yellow, but also deeply psychological and highly misleading connection. Eventually, that Cor van Hout will be released from jail and then put back for 4 more years, and then he would die. I think it was assassination, his death, I'm not sure. And Peter would speak up in his funeral. So genuinely expressing his, him to be missing this person, finding him very intriguing. So that is a very, it's the very type that does make movies, and indeed Peter wrote a book about the crime of kidnapping Mr. Heineken from the perspective of Cor van Hout, and I think it was also made into a movie. So, never mind. So, without further ado, let's take a look at a Synastry, a very unpredictable Synastry. So, when you write Synastry, you have love compatibility calculator, but love is many things. And basically, here the inner cycle is the chart of Cor van Hout. You must ignore the ascendant in Cor van Hout because I didn't find it. But I would not give up this Synastry, right? So, and also this is a very public case. It's not like looking into people's, pants or something like that. So it was out and about. It was spoken, and I think that's fair enough to discuss it astrologically. And the outer cycle is the Vries chart. So the reporter, the crime reporter, and the criminal. The criminal is the inner cycle. The crime reporter is the outer cycle. So as per their age, De Vries was born in November 56, 14, and Cor van Hout in August 57. Okay, so there was not too much time between these people. They met at around 83, 84. So the case was 1984, 1983, which for De Vries would be his Saturn return. Okay. And perhaps a bit later would be Cor van Hout's Saturn return. So Cor van Hout was De Vries' Saturn return, and De Vries' seventh house is a Cancer ascendant, so his seventh house is ruled by Saturn, it's Capricorn. And so one interesting transit to look at would probably be 1984, if I will manage to do this later. But let's just take a look at the core thing. As per Saturn, they have Saturn degrees apart in Sagittarius. So, indeed, Cor van Hout was to be Peter De Vries' Saturn return. The sixth house is for, and this is the sixth house. Okay. Saturn for the chart of Peter De Vries is the malefic out of sect. So that means anything Saturn is more problematic, and indeed this relationship was very highly criticized, understandably. But you can also see how there was the situation where a person has made his career by attending to unresolved crime cases that are becoming higher and higher profile crime cases, and now upon his Saturn return, the enemy becomes a friend. Okay, now seventh house is both partners and open enemies. As for triplicity, I would need to look at it a bit deeper and come up with answers. De Vries has his descendant in 19 degrees Capricorn. So the first thing we see here is that the one person is another person's Saturn return. Okay, and if Saturn is ruling your seventh, the chances that you get to work on your seventh house, which are partners, marriages, but also open enemies. Okay, and in this case, befriending or getting to know an enemy is when you have major Saturn transits. Okay, so Saturn return is one of them. Saturn to the seventh house. Saturn to the seventh house. Oh, Saturn return because it's the seventh house ruler. And Saturn maturation. Okay, Saturn to Jupiter, Saturn to Venus, and so on and so forth. So that's the first thing that pops up. Yeah, the Neptunes are pretty much the same. It's the same year, so outer planets in and of themselves are not making a big difference. Okay, there was another chart where they did make a difference, but it's a bit more yellow, so I don't want to go there. I've managed to stop myself, which I'm proud of me. So Venus for De Vries he has Jupiter in Virgo, that for him is in the third house of siblings, of neighbors, of friends. And Cor de Vries has his Venus there. So has his Venus, his Mercury, his Jupiter begins to be on the fourth. So that's interesting for de Vries. So Venus conjunct in Jupiter. That literally means a sibling-esque connection. Okay, Venus is about a sisterhood, actually. Okay, it's about connection. It's about bringing things together. And on the Jupiter, here, with Jupiter is the ruler of the seventh. Okay, so anything that comes to de Vries Jupiter basically messes up with his seventh as well, in a good way or bad way. What does it mean? It's the ruler of the ruler. Okay, for every sign you have a ruler, and then where that ruler is in a sign. That sign also has a ruler, and so the ruler of the ruler plays a part. So if you it's kind of like that. It's a bit like the Durex advertisement. It's like when you sleep with that, you sleep with the person that slept with that. So that's the rulers. Okay, it's like when you hit on this somebody's Jupiter, you hit on whatever is in Pisces and in Sagittarius, and if one of them happen to be the ruler of the seventh, so you're indirectly associated with the seventh. So that means that this connection between the Venus and Jupiter is more than the sibling-esque connection, which is close enough. Okay, it's a neighborly, it's a brotherly. Okay, it's very brotherly, even though you say it's Venus, but yes, it's Venus in the third house. It's also where communication is, house of communication, and indeed Jupiter. De Vries would write a book about this friendship and about this case. So very close connection. And Cor van Hout also brings his Jupiter into de Vries third house. So the communication here is like you communicate with your sibling, with your brother. There's a very close connection in here that we're talking about. And then the Cor van Hout also brings Mars to this house. Mars is a planet of conflict. It could also be passion and drive, but the flip side is conflict. I don't have the ascendant for Cor de Vries. My God, this is probably the funniest line of this episode. I'm very glad I chose this chart. Yeah, fan base, fanfics, whatever. Mars here is basically both conflicts and arguments, and but also direction, drive, and so on and so forth. So they were indeed traveling together. Jupiter in the third house, so is traveling to other countries with this person. But what does this Mars mean for de Vries? So where is the Scorpio? So Scorpio is the fifth house. This means Mars is the ruler of the fifth. And so connection with Mars triggers in the fifth. De Vries has both his Mercury and his Sun in the fifth, which makes him a great performer, entertainer, writer, and also reporter. Okay, he managed to be a celebrity thanks to his reporter abilities and scorpionic depth. Before I'll tackle this moon, and the 10th house is Aries. Okay, so anything Marsy for de Vries brings up the 10th and the 5th. Okay, basically what de Vries did for fun was associated with the career. In his own chart, he has his Mars to his midheaven. Okay, and here in Pisces, that means it's the 9th house for him. That means that he would have important, actually, teachings, Martian teachings, but also philosophical teachings, because it's a Jupiter sign, through his vlogs or books, and in that case it was also the Meester Geslaffer, which was a series that I believe was broadcasted once a week. So it's very much like a blog, but a very intense one. It's very fit for Virgo in the third house, because Virgo is very much about hard work, and it does take meticulous hard work to bring such an episode every week. It also means that the midheaven makes the native deal with conflicts. Okay, and indeed indeed Cor van Hout and the sibling-esque relation, as well as the books and movies that became a point for where de Vries had to kick off criticism against him. Okay, there's this public image. So that is another point for this Mars. So this is the third house. And Cor van Hout brings his son, and Uranus to a certain degree, but his son, this Uranus is actually interesting, son to the second house for de Vries. So that kind of means that the personality or the shine of who Cor van Hout is first of all very much in alignment with Leo, because this is a sun in Leo. Okay, but it also means that that de Vries makes money from Cor van Hout, which indeed, okay, is becoming profitable. But also this person teaches de Vries can perhaps learn a certain skill or performance, but here it doesn't really seem like that's the case. It's more like de Vries gained the spotlight, again, in a very controversial way. He was famous before that, but again, this was both a high-profile case, and the friendship itself kind of gained him through controversy, which is also Uranus, a spotlight. Okay, he made a movie about this kidnapping of Mr. Heineken, and a book. Okay, so and this movie was made already associated with Hollywood. So there's this Dutch reporter, famous as he may be, that is learning a lesson or two about fame, and applying these lessons. His second house also where we apply our skills, and becomes known also in Hollywood. Okay, in the film industry. So developing more aspects of this basically sun in the fifth that you already have, by being not just a reporter and a truth seeker and truth finder and bringing people to justice, but also an entertainer, a screenwriter, a producer. Perhaps, I don't know if he produced this or he wrote this, but basically becoming worldly known as a result of this friendship, even more. Okay, so it wasn't that he lacked fame. Okay, he was a very, very prominent figure, but he became more and more, and this friendship assisted in that. Now, I said this Uranus is interesting. Let's take a look at the moon. Okay, the Uranus, de Vries has moon trine Uranus, which is a great aspect to have. It can denote of being able to have or grow in an environment with radical acceptance to your emotional nature. Okay, when we radically accept how we feel, we are much more able to tame our behavior, to be authentic, and to have authentic connections, because the moon is where we have this attachment, this connection. So when he met another person that brings this Uranus within aspect that still trines the moon, it means that also Cor van Hout would have this radical acceptance towards de Vries. Okay, Cor van Hout's Uranus, as well as de Vries is on Uranus, but is also accepting his I will say something. Jewel from Truth in Aspect Astrology, which I absolutely love. Okay, she made a video about the composite. Okay, the composite I don't remember if it was Synastry or composite aspect of Moon and Uranus harmonious aspect. And what she said is, I remember the song was, I have a peaceful, easy feeling about you. I know that you will not let me down. Okay. Imagine what it's like for a crime reporter, a person who's very passionate about bringing people to justice and is genuinely passionate about seeing a person who did something bad behind bars. Having that person that is behind bars, you brought them to be behind bars, and this person is radically accepting of your emotional nature. I got a peaceful, easy feeling. I know you wouldn't let me down. Okay, that is a big deal. That is a big deal. Because we could say there's a sickliness connection, there's a profit connection. Now we have a radical acceptance connection, an outer planet to inner planet connection. You remind me of those things that I feel safe around. You remind me of those people that I feel safe around, but you made this brutal crime. Hey, you remind me that the people that actually accept me for who I am. There's people probably of the reason that I am who I am, but you did this horrible crime. It's like, oh shit. Oh shit. Okay. So this is a very key aspect. Now, this moon for the freeze is in the 10th house, and it's also conjuncting Ceres and Aries. So Aries is, her card of enlightenment is Discordia. Nothing like Aries to bring a person with a person that they put behind bars. Like you put all your passion to bring this person to justice, to put them behind bars, and boom, you have this authentic, emotional, radical acceptance from this person. Okay, it's a very Aries thingy to happen. Okay, it's a very Aries thingy to happen. It puts you in a connection with a myriad of what you thought this is a human being, or how could somebody do this thing, and this is a human being, this is a monster, dehumanization, this is a psychopath, psycho this, psycho that, narcissist, okay, all of those things. And now this is the person that you genuinely feel safe to be yourself around. You genuinely feel they won't let you down, and you're not being, it's not an illusion, okay? It's not a hard Neptune aspect, okay? It's a genuine radical acceptance Uranus aspect, okay? It's what people kind of crave. And that is a big deal. This is a very big deal. It's one of the key aspects that would explain what did they find in each other. What did, or more importantly, what did Peter de Vries found there? So that's definitely something to look at. Now take a look at the around the moon of Corvan Hout. He has an exalted moon in Taurus with, is this Rahu kid? Is Ketu. Is Ketu. I'm remembering. So moon, and you see that when I'm looking at this chart, immediately I, as the spectator, have already this free, jovial, comfortable kind of, it gives a kind of energy that's kind of like, oh, a camaraderie, a friendship. Because when you look at charts, it's kind of like you're looking at talisman. And of course, it's important to also look at my chart in relation to this. But there's this camaraderie thingy. You see this energy. It's like it's light, it's fun, it's joyous. It is a relationship between a brutal kidnapper, these horrible crimes, and basically the person that exposed them and brought them into justice. I'm beginning to feel a bit more autobiographical than I planned. So, Moon Ketu. Moon Ketu. Well, Ketu is where our soul has been before. Ketu is where our energy is drained. Ketu is, Moon Ketu can give a person like this emotional, oh, kind of like, whether it is depression or despair or something like that. And then what does this moon do? The moon for Cor de Vries, and is Ketu, but the moon, is first of all opposing the sun of Peter de Vries. Moon opposition sun is very interesting. The moon opposition sun is kind of like the energy of a full moon. Okay, while these are opposing, they also see each other, and there is also attraction because it is polarities. Okay, it's not, it's not, you prefer to marry someone who's sextile, who is sextile to moon and sun, or with a trine to moon and sun, but with the opposition, this is I see you, I see you, you're my polar opposite. Okay, I see it. Okay, let's see, I am a person who's deeply concerned about justice and bringing people into justice. You're a person who's very concerned about uh, comfort or perhaps some material wealth that you need. I'm a person who is very happy with minimalism. You're a person who is safe around abundance. Okay, I see you. You're the polar opposite of me. But this also means something. Um, this moon is also opposing the Mercury for the Vries, which means, and indeed what happens, the Vries wrote about Cor van Hout, and Cor van Hout was hurt. He said, this is too negative. It's like, we're good friends, why are you covering me so negatively? Perhaps because you committed a crime that is incredibly horrid. And so that is a very difficult position for the moon to be. Okay, he's being seen, but the way that he's been talked about is not in alignment with what feels safe for him. Okay, and here the obligation to cover the truth. Okay, the Sun and Mercury in Scorpio, the obligation to speak your truth or what you believe is right is more important than to make somebody who is having a moon in a hard aspect to this feel nice. You would ask, what if that moon with Ketu was with Pisces? Would still the Vries cover him in the same way, or would the Vries be nicer? I don't know. But this is something that is a part of the engineering of human dynamics. And in this case, this is how it played a part. What else does this moon do? Is this moon is trining Cor van Hout's own Venus, which means that the relations between basically what makes you feel safe and what makes you feel loved and sensuality, but also what makes you feel safe, what makes you feel appreciated, loved, is in harmony. So you can feel safe and loved by the same person. And this Venus is conjunct in Jupiter, so the moon is trining the Vries Jupiter. What that does, it means that the Vries is able to conceptualize the emotional needs of Cor van Hout. Okay? And is able to comment it from an intellectual, analytic way. And I haven't read the book, but it would definitely help me to exercise my Dutch, the Dutch version. So The thing is, it would be interesting to read the book after actually doing this, this. And the interesting thing is that when you think about the power of human connection, the word power, have to address it later. But if you think about the, the beliefs, the worldview that the reporter, which is the Fries, has, and the need of emotional safety, material safety as emotional safety, or maybe even women, I don't know, as emotional safety, and then with that keto, that feeling of that being drained or that being insufficient is something that the Fries is able to intellectually comprehend. But because this Jupiter is also ruling his 7th house, then intimately relate to. Not so directly, but he's able to intimately relate to the emotional situation that Cor van der Hout is in. Okay. So on the one hand, from his son, okay, from the Fries son, Sol, he's seeing him directly, but there are two different cases. There are two different beings. They're polar opposites. But when it comes to his worldview, he's able to relate. Okay, he's intellectually able in his beliefs, in his spirituality, to understand, or to have perhaps a spiritual compassion or practical compassion. And indeed, if I think about what de Vries provided for Cor van Hout, other than newspapers, because he did, and they both were a fan of soccer group Ajax, which I suspect to be the reason that that I was introduced to the Fries. But yeah, I'm not going to get into that because it would bring up a chart that I am not looking at. So the thing is that other than the fate, the football, soccer, what you call soccer is football. We call football what you call soccer. So European is different, but the thing is that he provided for him a newspaper that he liked. He provided to him to catch up news on his favorite sports team, which could be this Marcin III, but he also provided for him more comfortable conditions to meet together in person, to drink booze together, okay, to drink alcohol together, and to fly on a private jet and look for a place to land together. Okay, they also met around the body of water, okay, around the bridge. So next to jail or something like that. So the Fries did a bit cater to, or more than a bit cater to, the needs for comfort that Cor van Hout had. And he was able to see, even though he was not an astrologer, and it's actually kind of geniusy, because when you are an astrologer, it humbles you. When you're not an astrologer, you need to have all these dogmas of psychology to build up and to think and to probe and to this and to that. But also, he had a disposition to be able to successfully do that with the Jupiter moon trine. And that basically means, look at how compartmentalizing his Virgo placements. It's all to the detail, every single detail. It's so good for astrology, though. And so he was able to understand that lack of material abundance that perhaps has led to the desire to perform crime in there, or the feeling of material lack, comfortable lack. And so the Fries was providing him with what he needed. Now, of course, you could say, yes, the Fries also wanted to write a book. And so he knew what to provide for him. And that is to provide for him connection. But it was not just, the Fries was not faking it. Okay, and that is important. And he was very honest about him not faking it. Okay, so it was both him doing what will be giving him something that is of value, whether it's information about the case, to write a story about this, to make of it a yellow thing, you know, but a fascinating and intriguing thing, and a bit lighter. Okay, if you see, if you see dead bodies of people who are murdered and nobody tends to them, and you are an emotional person who is able to relate to people, which he is, so it's very difficult. You want a little brighter lighter a bit after that, and that was a brighter lighter, a relative to Scorpio. So those providing for were not only utilitarian for I will get the information out of him, but it were also genuine providing for and catering to the emotional needs of Corban Hout from a point of genuine friendship. Okay, which was of course criticized, understandably criticized, but also it's understandable when you look at this chart why. It's understandable why they met, why they were befriended, what did it serve, even on a deeper, it's kind of like things begin to rise up. It's kind of like you're doing all this gloomy thingy of the hard work and so on, and you become famous for that, but just like you become famous for tending to a lot of war, basically, which is not something that you have aversion to, but it's also draining to do that, and then eventually you have this still very intriguing, applying to the Aries moon needs of intricacy and representing the marginalized, but now the marginalized is not murdered. He's a murderer. He's the other side. But a kidnapper and so. But it's also kind of like it's swaying on the Aries moon for the freeze in a way where he can meet those marginalized representation of the marginalized people, but now as the underdogs of society, while keeping to emphasize that they committed a terrible crime, as well as showing the interest, the intrigue of them as a person. And you must understand, it's the same, the freeze that covered those cases that nobody tends to. So when I even think about it, you know, this friendship was his Saturn returns, kind of like he tended to so much of that nobody looks at, that eventually he gets to have this tabloid relationship with the criminal. Okay, he's like, he gets to have this yellow thing and enjoy it, because he's paid his due as to representing the marginalized people whose nobody would look into his debt, into their debt. And there's also a human being. There's other facets to that connection. So that was yet another facet of the intricate thing around this. Now, what this moon for Corvan Hout is doing more, it is sextiling Mars in the freeze chart. Okay, the Mars next to the midheaven. And this is a very interesting one because the relationship is between a criminal that the freeze chases and the Mars that is the act of chasing and bringing to justice. So it gives us a conglomerate of interesting things. And this Mars also rule the freeze moon, okay, with this Aries and Ceres and all that. And so what this gives us is, well, this Mars is basically sextiling the moon in the sense that it's easier to catch, okay, Corvan Hout, because it's easier for the freeze to get, you know, in martial arts and in martial arts in the army. Okay, I am Israeli, and Israeli, everybody talks about this. Even if you didn't go to the army, you know that in the army there is what we call chatira lemaga, which basically means that if you have an enemy, you want to come close to touch. to touch the other person. And if the Mars was too invasive on the moon, then that moon would flee from Mars, that moon would be, feel violated by Mars. And to touch, you need to have, okay, I will say an even more terrifying thing. When I was in academia, and one of my lecturers would be my Me Too veteran case. So he was eventually offensive towards me. But in the beginning, when he approached me, he wasn't standing directly next to me, not in front of me. He was standing beside me, but with a bit of an angle that reminds me of that sextile. It's kind of like he wanted to get in touch with me, but in a way that wouldn't threaten me. And while I appreciate the gesture, I still felt uncomfortable with him. Okay, I still felt not safe completely to be there. And so here we have this similar thing where there is a gesture of coming into touch with the other person. Okay, but the coming into touch with the other person, which I think also happened to the Mars of that person a bit, is well, I'm not a criminal, but the thing is that the coming into touch here in the sextile here also create another effect in which the Mars is warmly received. And what happens when you're warmly received? Mars, my darlings, I will say it rules the phallus. And you think about it as an energy as well as in the physical. Okay, what happens when you treat the phallus well? Okay, the person whose phallus it is, regardless of the gender, she's feeling appreciated, and what happens? Their heart is opening. Okay, it's basically when your moves are being welcomed, warmed emotionally, then if you intended to do something that is like to harm or to do this, it sweetens. It sweetens because now, you're being warmly received. So, and this sextile can mean if you come to catch a criminal, but they're very warm to you. Okay, I can give you another example. It was at the airport and in Israel, and they have the people who are the security have these big guns. Okay, there's big guns. It's the rifles. The rifle is the big one, right? Others, they have this thingy there. The barrel is like really big. And I was going up the stairs, and a security person was going down the stairs. He was fixing his big rifle, and the barrel was pointed at me, but not directly. It was kind of like kind of like the sextile. And I was just finding that to be highly embarrassing for him, because obviously I'm not a criminal. So I was just looking at him directly in his eyes and smiling. It's kind of like, oh, this is a funny scene. Okay? And so imagine like I'm not a criminal, but that Cor van Hout is a criminal. And so imagine you come to catch a criminal, you just smile at your gun. Which is what happened to the phrase at court. It's literally what happened to the phrase in court. And the story goes, I will try to put the video on the, it's a 7 months old video on the link, because I find it very interesting. And the story goes that at court, okay, the Fries brought this person into justice. They're sitting at court, the Fries is there. And suddenly that guy, the Cor van Hout, is kind of, I don't know if it's winking, not winking, but it's kind of like making an eye contact with the Fries. That was amiable. and the Fries, of course, could not ignore that. He was confused about it, and then later he reached out for the moon person, for Cor van Hout. So this very funny situation where it's like that you're... I understand for the point of the Fries from there, it's like, you put in a person to justice, they smile at you. I was like, you're being sentenced to how many years in jail? And they just smile at you, amiably smile at you. And it's like, they like you. And like, why are you liking me? I'm pointing the gun at you. It's like, well, but the angle is kind of interesting, isn't it? So, And so the Freeze, of course, being the scorpionic person that he is, and with Mars in Pisces, you merge with you with your you can laugh all you want. One of the funniest spirit of matter points is where I delineate to Mars in Pisces for the Freeze, because I went like, oh, I didn't like, oh, they merge with with their goal. So yes, and so the thing is that for the Freeze, which has this Mars that is able to completely merge with whatever he's after, whether it's a criminal or a person or whatever, then and that's next to his midheaven. So he's a very successful man, also thanks to that. And that quality, okay, is suddenly met with this person who's smiling at you, admiring your drive, sozusagen, okay? So there is a very, there is a very, the cliche thing would be homoerotic, blah, 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 but it's beyond homoerotic. It is conjugality. I don't know how to say that, or even if it's the right word. It's warm encounter. Okay, it's beyond. Yes, Mars is eroticism, but it's beyond eroticism. It's a warm encounter where you get the human part, which is what the moon of the Freeze craves. Okay, to be in touch with humanity is what this moon craves, and so you get the human part, basically meeting you in an uncanny situation. That is what movies are made of, and this is life. Okay, this is life. And again, almost like the Freeze, I feel called to remind myself that this is happening with the person who committed serious crimes. Okay, so not to idealize. Almost like the Freeze, I'm rather not to idealize. Okay, that person looking at the Freeze here, that amiable look at the Freeze here, is from a person who did things that are that nobody should be doing them. Okay, and perhaps did not even regret it. So yes, regret being caught more so than anything else. So that is intrigue. So what else? Yes, we have. So this is what the moons are kind of doing here, and then we have Mercury for Cor van Hout opposing the Mars of the Freeze. That is, it's kind of like the communication and the drive are different. This is where the Freeze is able to act in a way that is not. That's very interesting. This Mars opposing the Mercury. But this moon is kind of remediating this opposition. Okay, Mars is our drive, our actions. Mercury is our communication. So the way somebody communicates is in the opposite interest of your drive. It can come up in many ways. It's not a favorable aspect to have in Synastry. But here the moon kind of brings this, hey, but I like the way you act. Okay, and I find it warm. I'm drawn to. I feel emotionally safe with the way you capture me. Literally so. Okay. And of course, these are my projections, and there are many interpretations, but it's kind of like, it literally so. It's the moves. Moon Mars, kind of like, I like the way you move. That's what it is. Which makes it really fascinating, and in the context of all things. So what else do we have here? Oh yeah, this Mercury also sextiles the Mercury of the Fries. That means that unlike with the Mars, okay, where the action and the words are at odds, but it's like the words of one person is at odds with the action of another person. Um, but the Mercuries, okay, they sextile. And so the scorpionic depth is met. What the Scorpio loves? Details. What the Cor van Hout provides. Plenty of them. To the minuscule of a detail. Okay? So this is a sextile. The communication is lovely. The Fries only wants to know more, to ask more, to be provided with more details, which Van Hout is happy to. Just like, this is what I do best. This is what I get to the detail of something. And when you think about an investigation, you want to know how some crime happened. Okay, Cor Van Hout is going to tell it to the detail. Okay, the Fries has got him at, there, but he got the Fries that way, the same way. He's a very mutual rapport there. Okay, with this, a bit of, even though the world Pluto is not here, there's a bit of a power thing here, where having a Mercury and its home sign and the details in a position where you're dealing with someone whose Mercury craves to know every single bit of whatever happened, it's the deepest, the darkest, the extreme, the whatnot, the mundane. This is okay. Scorpio is not just about the extreme; it's also about the mundane. He's also able to see the details in the mundane, in the boring. He's also very interesting to do that. So when you are ample with details and you meet a person whose Mercury is in yin sign, which is an attracting sign, Scorpio is drawing in. It's kind of like wanting to vacuum you out of your details. You feel very intellectually desired. Okay, what you have, what you say, every word you say, the other person is drinking literally every word you say. Yeah, I'm being reminded of other situations where I was told that by someone who eventually ended up being offended towards me. It was my psychotherapist. But it's pretty much your speech is being vacuumed, being sucked in, it's being absorbed. But it's not just to being absorbed. The Mercury for Scorpio is it's experiencing viscerally every word you say. And with other aspects, it could be very problematic. Like, I have Mercury in Aries. Yeah, but with the Mercury in Virgo, every single detail about the case, how did it happen, what happened, what were you thinking, what were you feeling, what were you this, what were you that, what's going on. So Scorpio asks and asks and asks, and the Mercury in Virgo tells and tells and tells. Okay, Virgo is not about hiding something, but actually about nitpicking, telling it to the detail. Okay, if Virgo is spilling the tea, you're going to get every molecule of it. Okay, whoa, what a great aspect to have with a Mercury in Scorpio. And this Mercury also sextiles the Sun. For the Fries, it means that this communication is very much in alignment. And indeed, the more details he gets from this person, the more he shines as a person who unravels, exposes. It doesn't matter that he got sucked in, but now he sucks them in as well. And it's almost like it's a tantric function. It's like, it's not about sucking someone in from kind of like a manipulative or this or that, but more like an erotic tantric thingy where you're like, give me that information. It's like, for sure, darling. What do you want to know? Okay, so and there's and also the sense of humor of these two can be, they get each other, so you can tell jokes to each other. Okay, you can imagine that such a criminal can crack a joke, and that reporter will be right on. It's like, keep on giving it to me. And so as the freeze continues on to talk with this person, his own ego is being embellished simply by the fact that this person gives him details. Okay. And also the communication here is not manipulative. It's very genuine and open. And that is, while this Mercury by Van Hout is opposing the Mars for the freeze, okay, so he could be maybe joking around his actions, okay, joking around the freeze, kind of like, oh, you're here, you're there. He's kind of knowing that he got him where he wants him. He could be joking about like what he's doing. Okay, and there you are here talking to me and so on. And while the Mars thing is kind of like, yeah, I don't like what's going on here. I don't feel I'm being pulled in the right direction. I'm going to get it what I want to get from it. The Sun is kind of like, of course I am. Of course I am. It's going to be a book. It's going to be a movie. Yeah, I'm thinking about also other things that happen later, but that's interesting. So that is another to the detail, very very interesting one. However, the Sun for Cor van Hout is squaring the Sun of Peter de Vries, and that thereby squaring his Mercury. What that tells me, okay? Sun squaring Sun. Okay? When you walk up in the room and you light up the room, part of it could be your ascendant, but it's kind of like your personality that shines. The who you are-ness that shines is the Sun. Okay? And so it's a dissonance, because if we put more on the Cor van Hout, it's like, oh, he's a very interesting person, very intriguing person. What does it make the shine of the Vries look like when he is the person who is supposed to put people like him in jail, which he did do, but now he befriends this person. But if you put the Vries shine in here, what does it make of the other guy look like? Okay, and this is not an opposition. Okay, it's a tension that's in there. And in tension, there is the push and pull. Okay, there is, we benefit each other, but there's a crisis, and that crisis benefits us. Okay, hard aspects in synastries are the ones we grow. Okay, they're creating intricacy, they're annoying, but we grow with it. We're holding that tension. Okay, by holding that tension of the square between the suns, actually both suns gain their fame and their shine. Now with the Sun-Mercury square, this is a different one, okay? Because from the Van Hout perspective, it's kind of like, I really like giving or spilling all the tea to this person, but it kind of makes me look bad that I'm doing it, okay? It's kind of like, I like talking to this person, okay? They get me, but the more I talk with this person, what they do with it, which is what the Vries do with it, is not in alignment with how I glow in the world. Okay? If that was a romantic chart, it's kind of like, oh, I really had a good conversation with my partner, and then that partner takes your word, and while they do get you, they emphasize something that you're not quite, so like it's kind of like a triggering, doesn't necessarily mean demoting, okay, because they can like that about you. It's like, I like that about you, that you are I don't know, think about the quality or a shine, or for Leo, I don't know, for Leo, I like that about you, you always seek attention, and you're like, that you always are happy to be seen. And the Leo kind of feels like, are they telling me that I'm an attention whore? What's going on? And it could be a half joke kind of thingy, but it can also be that Yeah, it's a weird connection to have with the sun. The sun is also a form of intelligence and Mercury's communication. So it's kind of like you don't manage to pass through all my intelligence with, even though I speak to you, so that you understand what I say, you want to hear what I say, but you don't really get me at a personality level, which is something we need to keep in mind. Um, Now that we got to what is brought to which houses, um, okay, he does bring, okay, Van Hout does bring his Black Moon Lilith to the ninth house for the Freeze. The Freeze doesn't have anything conjuncting that, but the ninth house is our worldview, and Lilith is the gut instinct, and while and that with the related of Venus and with the Jupiter here and the Moon trining the Jupiter for the Freeze, um, is, oh, this person triggers a certain house in me. What do I find in this house that also belongs to this person? Oh, they're Lilith, the part that they will not be dominated, subordinate, or above anybody. Okay, which can be highly attractive because Lilith is very attractive. She wants to see you eye to eye, which is exactly what the Moon conjuncting Aries in Aries. You can't see it here, but Aries is conjuncting the Moon for the Freeze, is craving. Okay, show me some more standing for yourself and not agreeing to be seen as above or beneath me. Show me some more of that. I love that, and I want to learn more about that. I want to know more about that philosophically, religiously, spiritually. Show me some more of that Lilith that you have, even though it's not a direct connection. It is also a part of the neural network that's being lit here in a very literal sense. So now we got another interesting aspect. The Saturn for, okay, this one is actually important. For Van Hout's Saturn, his Saturn is trining his own Uranus and the Freeze Uranus, which kind of means that there is refreshing liberation around structure that for the Freeze has to do with relationship, one-to-one partnership. Doesn't mean marriage or romance in this case, although it could be, but it's actually the one-to-one partnership. Okay, the seven open enemies as well as partners. And so there's a liberation to that Saturn, whereas in the Freeze chart, this aspect is kind of less perfected, but it's also there. Okay, it's also there. By the way, a bit of yellow detail, the Freeze was for many years in non-monogamous relationship, and even when he was married, was in open relationship. So Uranus trining the Saturn. Saturn is the structure of relationship. With Saturn, one can feel like they are a bit confined in the seventh house, and Uranus trining it can actually be a liberating, okay, form of structure. Like it's a very rigid structure, but it's unusual. It's liberated. So we've also seen that. This is open. Somebody spoke up. I don't have things he didn't speak up openly, and nor would I delineate that. Um, so that is being first of all repeated with this with Van Hout, but not only that. Kurt Van Hout's Saturn trines the Freeze Moon. Now we talk about a situation where this person they met on the Saturn return of the reporter of the Freeze, and that is key because first of all, the relation between them, the confinement, the jail that is for Cor Van Hout, is being liberated. Okay, he's been liberated, and in a way that is amiable. Okay, it's not through crisis. It's actually in a very woo way. Okay, wu wei, without effort, wei. Um, uh, he gets the person who puts him in jail to change the conditions in which he is confined. Okay, and um, and the Saturn trining Moon. Well, Saturn to Moon connection, if it's a hard aspect, it can be like emotional criticism. That is kind of like really kind of like cold and annoying. It's a very hard aspect to have. Like you really need a lot of remediation of that to be able to go through that, if you go through that. But when it is a trine or a sextile, it can give emotional stability. It can give maturity of emotions, okay, emotional maturity, and it can give an emotional bond that has longevity. Okay, so we understand what came to be here around the Saturn return. Or the Saturn return, we are asked for a certain maturation here in our relationship. You can understand how when somebody assists in maturation of our moon, even though it's a bit unpleasant, but it's not the hard aspect unpleasant, can assist in becoming more mature in our one-to-one relations. That is the seventh house where Saturn rules. Okay, as well as the sixth, which means how we deal with enemies and our service to the world and our physical health as well. Which brings another point here, because it could be that this relation has a certain effect on the physical health, physical mental health, something like this. I don't know. I would not be surprised if the Fries addressed it, because while he was a very private person, he was also a very inquisitive person, and when it is coming to inquisite his own emotions towards this, Cor van Hout, he was not saving us with detail. So if there is anything like that, I assume that he would speak about this. It's not something I've heard. Now let's go to other planets, to inner planets. We have a square of Pluto and Saturn. So the Saturn for Cor van Hout is squaring the Pluto of the Fries. And mind you, the Fries has Pluto on Regulus. It's one heck of a Pluto. So this means that for Cor van Hout, his own Saturn maturation, which will be less than a year from the Fries's one, so they're both going through a Saturn maturation level together. His own maturation basically meant a crisis. And Saturn to Jupiter is also restraints on the freedom that one has. Okay, restraints on the freedom. Or certain maturity of whatever house. Okay, for the Fries is maturity of his sixth house, which is health, enemies, and his service to the world. And the ruler in this third, so it's also maturity of him being an author, and so on and so forth. But for Cor van Hout, and it is something that the Fries was very able to see and understand, is that the Saturn maturation was meaning that there is a great limitation to the structure of his beliefs. Okay, his beliefs are being transformed in some way. But this could also be one of the things that there's a crisis, and this crisis is basically his imprisonment. Okay, the Fries brought to his imprisonment. So this is a very hard aspect to have in a connection. Okay, Saturn, Pluto, hard aspects are not jolly. As for the Fries himself, his own Saturn is just yeah, just yeah, he's also having this, first of all, the square to Mars here. No, square to Mars is the inner core von Hout thingy. Yes, for the freeze, Saturn is not yet reaching this point, or Saturn is yeah, it's also squaring. So the freeze has it in his own chart, the square to Saturn and Pluto. It's not something I remembered. Yeah, it's a separating one. It's a separating one. In both cases, but they both have the Saturn square Pluto. Here is just a very challenging aspect to have. It means that, is that true? Yes, let's take a look if we have, maybe like this would show me better. Yeah, about half Mercury, Pluto at around 0 or 1 degree of Virgo, and Saturn in the first degrees of Sag, with the freeze coming closer to the square than Van Hout. And Van Hout, yeah, so Van Hout is separating from both Plutos. It is actually for the freeze, yeah, that he has a separating Mars to Pluto hard aspect. It's a very difficult aspect to have. Okay? It means that the structure of your system, there can be a tremendous crisis around, in his case, it can also be even help with work, and it's kind of like the third house, work and the siblings, work and your daily routine, work and your communication. It's kind of like it's and it's a long-term thing. And this Saturn is ruling his 7th. So it requires a depth and intensity that is unusual to have around a certain topic in life, which is both the 7th and the 8th, because Saturn is ruling the 8th. But here it could be a very connective factor that both of them were going through this Saturn, sort of a kind of a square Pluto, with their Saturn return. So the Saturn return is squaring the natal Pluto as well. It's a big deal. Okay, it's a big deal. And at this situation where your Saturn is hard aspecting an outer planet, to have another person who's going through that with you is a big deal, whoever that person is. So, yeah. Like, one way to go about it is to have somebody who has Saturn trine Pluto, okay? Or that their Pluto trines your Saturn, okay? But another way to go about it, which is the Scorpionic way, is to have another person going through that with you. You do not be alone with this, witnessing. And this is important for a person who's doing reporters on crime and uncovering the hidden psyche. So why would a person do that? So that is a very interesting Pluto dynamic here. And touching on the vertex for the freeze. So touching on the vertex for the freeze. Make it even more fated. So it's a very fated encounter, as if we didn't guess. Now, let's see. The Neptunes. But the Neptune is sextile Pluto, is not doing very much. Okay, Neptune is not doing very much here. Now that we have a synastry, let's look at the composite and look at how much information I got, basically on the connection, not only on the freeze, okay? Also on the person for whom I absolutely do not have a birth chart, do not have a birth hour, a birth time, without the birth time. And now as we go a bit backwards and we do a composite, now let's look at what what's another aspect to this connection? There's another thing that you can do is a composite. Even when you don't have the birth time, you're going to have outer planets to inner planets. So what is a composite? It's the midpoint. Okay, if you count the distance between that person's moon to that person's moon, that midpoint becomes the composite moon. Okay, it's a midpoint technique. And it is a technique of combining energies. You see how they kind of like meet each other in the middle. And midpoints is also what we use for calculations in natal charts. So we have the parallel, contraparallel, the antishas. They are kind of circling around midpoint, the distance from the midpoint, and so on and so forth. So those are things that we use. Okay, and the composite is based on those midpoint techniques. Now, we can't look at ascendant and midheaven because we don't have both ascendants. Okay. What can we look at? First thing first, we look at this very probable Moon-Pluto trine, another symbol for emotional growth. Okay, and I think I talked about this when I was in Netherlands. I was in shelter in Amsterdam. The Pluto for, I think it was for Amsterdam, is opposing my moon, which is really annoying. And I learned about this person that has a Pluto trine in my moon also in composite. So it's a very remediating emotional aspect to have when you are undergoing times where you need to be emotionally resilient. Like, for example, when you need help from from people who tend to do everything possible so that you'll die in the street on your way to get help. And eventually the talisman was the person that was persecuting exactly those cases of people who die without anybody looking for them. So Moon trine Pluto is a very good aspect for emotional growth. It can get, when it's romantic, people can get possessive. Okay, so with this, De Vries and Van Hout, both of them could get kind of like emotionally possessive of each other, even though it's friendship. Okay, like wanting to spend time alone with each other, or desiring this person to only for themselves on an emotional level, or to have something unique on an emotional level. But mostly so, it is about dredging up emotions unexplored. And now you get to another moralistic. So I will not look at the composite, and I will wonder why did it come up. Because as we explore, I'm looking up, so I will not look at the chart. As we explore emotional growth, so let's say you have this reporter that whose life mission is to bring people into justice, to bring criminals into justice, especially organized crime, drug cartels, and so on and so forth, because Pisces. And so when your mission is to bring people into justice, your higher mission is to end the situation of crime. And so when you grow emotionally together with the criminal, there is a possibility where you could maybe get at something that, if you get that, it will, through emotional maturity and through the understanding that this moon of this person is with Keto. Okay, I speak it in astrologically, but he would probably say his own terms for that. And that this person has a certain emotional deprivation, even though the moon is exalted. They have the opportunity to be very safe, but they do need to be provided in a certain way. And it's like if you both grow emotionally from this friendship, then perhaps it is not a bad thing. Maybe he can become a better person as well. Okay? And there is this intrigue and this hope. Why did I say it? I have no idea. Because the moon is opposing Neptune. Okay, so yeah, the midpoint of moon opposition Neptune, it basically means high levels of ideation and disillusionment. High levels of ideation and disillusionment. Okay, And this moon is also opposing Mercury. So again, we have this communication that can hurt each other's feelings. And so going through that disillusionment, probably for either of them, can be facilitated or aided by the emotional maturity that Pluto provides. You got close, you got connected, you even got to feel safe with each other, but there is also high ideation. Perhaps one of both of you could have a savior complex around the emotional. It's kind of like, would I be saved by this person? But that is being highly disillusioned, and yet it's not like you've not been contributed, but by the merit of the Pluto trine. And this is an inherent thing with the Pluto Neptune sextile. Whatever trines Pluto sextile opposes Neptune, whatever trines Neptune opposes Pluto. Okay, and Pluto rules core changes, psychological stuff. Neptune rules drugs, also pharmaceuticals. Okay, so you go to your psychologist. Your psychologist may be very good and say, "Oh, but you need to be seen. Maybe you need a medication." Then you can say, "Oh, I will probably with the medication, I will go to my psychologist, and the medication kills you. It's a beta blocker." Or alternatively, you get a very good medication. Say, "Why don't you go to see a therapist?" And you end up with someone like my therapist. I got both the medication and the therapist not good, but with my Chiron is in conjuncting both Pluto and Neptune in my chart, so I got the delight to have both of them not working for me. But but in other cases, it's kind of like, well, that works, but that is disillusioning. That can save you, but that can absolutely outthrow you. And so it's a mixture of Swiss cheese solutions to psychology, to medicine, to world politics. And it's kind of like the sextile is lovely, but when everything aspects this sextile is lovely, but everything aspects this sextile, they get a mixture of good, deep, spiritual, transforming, and highly illusional. Okay. By the way, in my chart, I have my Mercury and Venus opposing the freeze Pluto, while there's the freeze opposing the freeze Pluto. Opposing the freeze Neptune. Pluto, I wouldn't be here. Opposing the freeze Neptune. Okay, but his Neptune is on my Pluto, and his Pluto is sextiling my Pluto. And I was going through a hard aspect from Pluto to Mercury, meeting a person who's I have probably idealizing him and having like a savior complex when I was channeling him or something like that, or maybe the other entity was having savior, maybe they can, I don't know what, not transfer to me their thinking, and I will be saved by that. But then on the Pluto level, it's kind of like, oh well, at least I got a person whose composite Pluto is with the trine to the moon. So it's kind of like, okay, at least I may be intellectually disillusioned or some disillusion from whatever, but at least I have those things working, okay? So that at least we have is very much anything that comes in contact, synastry or composite or natal chart with Pluto and Neptune, unless you are lucky to have the in conjunct, okay? Whatever in conjunct both of these gets that both of these have a mixture of work and not work, and eventually you have to kind of like, it's very difficult to deal with those. It's the odd. But other than that, this is a general thing that we have, and it comes around here too. So it's a part of the spirit of the times. And we have this Saturn-Pluto square maintained in the composite. Again, very difficult aspect. It's a crisis that changes structure. Okay. What structures would change there? I don't know. But for both of these, it's a crisis that changes structure. Okay, that is what it is. So there is more to this aspect that will probably, I guess, probably reading the book or seeing the movie would get more idea of what that was. So we got Venus Sun conjunction, very drawn to each other, very connected, very amiable. We got a Sun Uranus sextile, Venus Uranus sextile. Venus Uranus sextile is something that, you know, probably everybody craves to have in some connection. It's this free spirit without too much crisis around that free spirit. Sun Uranus, so liberation. Okay, feel basically being free together. That's what it is. Now, think about the conjoining of the Saturn. Like if you already have the Saturn Pluto conjunction and you have another person who's going through it with you, and together as you're getting through this darkness, you also feel free together. That was the meaning of this connection. Okay, it's a very important relationship in both of their lives. So, yeah, it is definitely, it's kind of like I feel free here when I am going through this. It's basically a word in isolation in certain cases. It's like we're going through this thing together and I feel free with this person that I'm going this thing through with. It's the there's hardly anything that can capture the psyche of a scorpionic placement, any placement, than the conjoining of going through crisis together. Unfortunately, I don't know chart, but a psychoanalysis related person in my life was overly jovial about trying to get that crisis and presence thingy together and to satisfy this in a very unhealthy way. So yeah, but this connection between these two people is the conjoining of, we go through these incredibly tough times together and we are feeling free going through this tough time together. I assume that somebody in my life wanted to achieve that, which ended up in disillusion, as that's not, that we didn't achieve that. Because I'm not I don't want you to hurt me. But in this situation, it was a person who was a criminal, and that person puts that criminal in jail, while going through it with him. And there was a high dependency on this connection by both of them, and a high sense of genuine liberation by both of them. Sun Venus trine in Mars. So the drive where this connection is going and the nature of this connection and the sense of connection is a very remediating composite to have. Now, given that both of them have the Saturn Pluto thingy and that this is the criminal and the person who captured it, is a very remediatory aspect to have. But Saturn is also trining Uranus, okay, which both of them have. Okay, so Saturn trining Uranus, again, alleviating the crisis through liberation of the confinement in the structure, okay, or the confinement of freedoms. Kind of like you find a way to be free within confinement. So that is, find a way to be free within confinement. So yeah, it is a very understandably controversial, and it is a part of the fabric of humanity. And it's a very interesting relation to explore. I guess because this relationship was so explored intimately into the detail by the priest himself, although the priest is no longer with us, then I felt more comfortable about taking this chart and kind of making a spirit of matters, kind of predicting what would I see here, knowing very little about the connection itself. So this is how we can get at a lot of a synastry without having an ascendant of one of the partners or even both of them. Okay, with the synastry, it's outer planets to inner planets, and the planets, its aspects between planets. With the composites, even more so. So the main, just the main challenge here is Neptune, even more so than Pluto. And Neptune is basically where we can elude ourselves. Neptune is also addiction and drugs. Okay, and um, and the blending of worlds. Okay, so there's a highly idealized spiritual experience, which I, as an observer, also experience while looking at this composite and synastry, as highly idealized connection that also has a lot of very concrete merits to it, and got this person, got Peter de Vries to speak in the funeral, to make a movie about this, to be very vocal about something that he wasn't usually vocal about, and that is an intimate, private friendship that he had. Okay, now I haven't read his autobiography yet, so I don't know, but that is very interesting. So the part taken of Peter de Vries in a book that involves his connection with another and the honoring of this connection through a book and a movie is not something that is something that he didn't do in his life. And so after his death, there was this, and I will address this briefly, there was this controversy where somebody that he was seen for a very long time in a hidden way came up with a book that they claimed it was written with de Vries himself and wanted to make a movie as well. And whatever we think about this, we can see that to say there is no reasoning to think that de Vries would be partaking in a book and a movie about his an intimate relation that he has with the person that perhaps was hidden for a while is not an argument that we can fully support. So that is something to, especially when that son of that person is falling in the Fries's Mercury house, which is the 12th house, hidden enemies and friends, but also it's a Mercury ruled house, and Mercury also rules his third house, which is what he writes books about and makes movies about. So so just one kind of brief mention around this topic. And sometimes we do need to get out of stigmas that we have. And Aries does that fascinatingly because something that can seem like one thing can be way more intricate than what it is. So that is kind of a side note that is important to say on the matter. And then I really like and this is the interesting feeling that I'm left with, that perhaps a lot of people would feel left with, is that I enjoyed making this episode. I enjoyed looking at this relationship. Right? It's kind of like you relieve that intricacy, and this is something that I really appreciate that the Fries was honest about. That he was enjoying their friendship, was not lying about this. He was not hiding how he feels, as well as not hiding the fact that he's trying to make justice with his words around what this person did, but also be true to his own feelings, which I find admirable and important and authentic. And it is actually radical honesty that allows us to eventually go about more right ways of acting. Okay, so this person did serve his time in jail. Okay, even though the Fries tried to improve the conditions a bit, the person did serve his time in jail. When he got freed, he got to another 4 years in jail. Eventually, this person died, and the Fries spoke on his funeral. So it's intricate, and it's understandable why it steers a lot, but it's perhaps by looking at this composite, we can perhaps come to more understanding and compassion towards the Fries. Here's the key figure here. Um, yeah, it's like, does this book help us to understand crime and the thing is that? Maybe, but does this book help us to understand, or does this composite and Synastry help us to understand why would a reporter be caught in such a situation and cater so much to another person, however much he benefits from it? And this is also another interesting note, is that this got the Fries in a situation where supposedly he would have been exploiting, okay, the situation, but genuinely he was befriending the person. Okay, so he did not exploit the situation to get the most out of this criminal, but he was treating this criminal with utmost respect. Okay, which shows that at least on a relational level, we have a case where he could have been exploitative, but he was actually genuinely interested, and that can ascribe to also the controversy after his death, where perhaps he was not exploiting a very young journalist with promises that he would marry her someday. Yeah, perhaps there were some things that were there were okay. Perhaps there were some things that were going on that were. Not going to attempt at doing that chart because I think that this is a chart that was not spoken about, and people are very much invited to read the book by the lady, as I think Tamina Akafi, something like that, as a later book. So people are welcome to read the book, which includes things that the Fries wrote, and that's more a testimonial. I prefer to look at a chart that of somebody that the discussion was when de Vries was alive. And I did not expect to reach this point because I was looking at this as fun and joy, just in a very weird way. But now that I've come a bit more grown and understand, like, how did this person relate, and there's something in the way that this person related that was just, at least in this case, was not exploitative. And I have reasons to believe that when it came to another person that Trix his Mercury house, he would be similarly inclined to not be exploitative, which is actually shed in a good light. I could, of course, be completely idealizing. Okay, and Mercury is opposing his Neptune. So I hope this was interesting to you as it was to me while I'm trying to go through this, let's say, this current planet's moon across Scorpio. 5 degrees already. Okay, 24 degrees left. And this moon trine Saturn, separating from a trine to Saturn, is applying to sextile Mercury. It's a moon day, Venus hour. It's, oh, but why? The meat heaven is Saturn ruled. Oh, but then, so yeah. that has been my own kind of self-care through this scorpionic moon and the sun in my seventh opposing Neptune. If I just try to do something that is not a podcast right now, I just begin to feel despair. Okay, to be honest, this is why I do this. So so that is my coping mechanism with despair and feeling of the sun in my seventh opposing my Neptune. So yeah, that's that. I'll release this episode. You can subscribe to me. You can watch Spirit of Matter. Share, comment, like. If you comment, if you're nice to me, talk to me nice. And that's it.